They handed you a name, a nation, a structure, and called it freedom. But behind every system, behind every institution, there is a blueprint. Not written in law, but in thought. An invisible doctrine whispered into the minds of kings, emperors, and presidents for over 2,000 years. It began with a book, Plato's Republic, praised as a vision of justice, worshipped as the foundation of Western philosophy. But beneath its surface lies something colder, something precise, a formula for control. In it, Plato describes a perfect society where every citizen has a role, every role is predetermined, and truth is protected by lies. Where rulers are not elected, but selected, raised from birth to believe they are above desire, above error, above the people they govern. They were called Philosopher Kings. And if you look closely, they never disappeared. They just changed their robes, swapped scrolls for screens, became the voices you trust, the platforms you use, the systems you depend on. Plato didn't just dream of utopia. He gave the powerful a weapon, the idea that control could be virtuous if guided by reason. And now, that reason has gone algorithmic. You think you're free because you can choose what to watch, what to buy, what to say. But the choices were curated before you ever asked the question. This isn't ancient history. This is the architecture of your reality. And it's time to see who built it. They don't need to lock you in chains. Not when they've locked your mind in a structure they designed. Plato's Republic wasn't just a thought experiment. It was a manual, a blueprint for a society where control is elegant, invisible, and accepted as justice. It begins with the soul. Plato believed your mind is divided into three parts: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. The rational seeks truth. The spirited seeks honor. The appetitive craves pleasure, food, sex, wealth. To Plato, a just society mirrors this internal hierarchy. The rational class, the philosophers, should rule. The spirited class, the warriors, should enforce. And the appetitive class, the masses, should obey. You were born into this without consent, not as an individual, but as a part of a machine. But how do you convince the masses to accept their place? You lie to them. Plato called it the noble lie. A myth told from birth that each person is born with a different type of metal in their soul. Gold for rulers, silver for warriors, bronze and iron for workers. A beautiful illusion that turns hierarchy into destiny, that makes inequality feel like fate. And it works, not because it's true, but because it's repeated. That's why they tell you you're just average. Why they sell you success stories while hiding the architecture of power. They don't need whips or prisons, not when they've built a myth into your blood. Plato also knew the danger of imagination. In his ideal republic, art is censored, poetry is restricted. Stories are rewritten, not to reflect life, but to shape it. Because fiction stirs emotion. Emotion fuels rebellion. So they sanitize your stories. They choose your heroes. They write the boundaries of your dreams. And they start early. Plato insisted that education must be controlled from birth. Children must be taught only what supports the state. taught not to question, but to conform. Sound familiar? From the textbooks you read to the algorithms that feed you, they've followed the blueprint well. And then there's the Philosopher King, the one who sees the forms, pure truth, untouched by opinion, the one who governs not for power, but because he knows best. But knowledge becomes tyranny when it's kept behind closed doors, when a few claim enlightenment and the rest are told to trust. Today, the king doesn't wear a crown. He wears a lab coat, a suit, a screen. And you follow because he sounds like reason. But the system was never about truth. It was about design, prediction, order, and the noble lie. You're still living in it. They told you it was progress, a march toward truth, toward order, toward utopia. But what they didn't tell you was whose utopia it really was. Plato dreamed of a world governed by reason, but dreams in the hands of power don't stay pure. They calcify, they weaponize, and they shape history. The early Christian church didn't just adopt faith, it borrowed structure from Plato. The hierarchy of souls became the hierarchy of heaven. God above, clergy to interpret, laity to obey. The invisible forms, perfect and eternal, became divine truth. Accessible only through the educated, the holy, the chosen few. Philosopher Kings became bishops, and education became catechism. Then came the Enlightenment. They told you it was the age of reason. But reason, too, can be stratified, ranked, claimed. Thinkers like Rousseau and Kant saw the same potential Plato did, a society shaped by rational order, not chaos. But this logic was easily twisted. Suddenly, natural orders emerged, social classes, racial hierarchies, gender roles, each assigned a purpose, a value. Gold, silver, bronze, the old metals, smelted into new ideologies. And what of the 20th century? Plato's fingerprints are everywhere, only darker. Totalitarian regimes perfected what the Republic hinted at: control of art, control of media, control of education. In Stalin's Russia, the state became the Philosopher King. Literature was rewritten, history was sculpted. The citizen's mind was not his own. In fascist regimes, myths were forged. National myths, racial myths, recycled noble lies passed as identity. The state dictated culture, purity, destiny, and the guardian class, still here. Not in armor, but in surveillance centers, in think tanks, in the curated algorithms deciding what you see and what you never will. They don't need soldiers to silence your mind, just the right curriculum, the right news, the right story repeated. Plato warned that the ideal society required censorship, not to punish, but to perfect. But perfection is a cage. Utopia becomes dystopia the moment disagreement becomes deviance. When control is rebranded as safety. When education becomes indoctrination. And you were told this was for your own good. That structure brings peace. That complexity needs a class of enlightened minds to govern the rest. But who decides who's enlightened? They do. They always have. And every time a society reaches for the ideal, it risks forgetting the individual, and the dream becomes a prison. You're not living in a failed society. You're living in someone else's ideal. They don't need myths carved in stone anymore. They have code, they have data, and they have you. In Plato's Republic, the masses are told a story, a noble lie, to ensure harmony. Gold souls to rule, silver to protect, bronze to serve. Not based on merit, but myth. Not for truth, but for order. Today, the noble lie is wrapped in convenience. It lives in your feed, your recommendations, your search results. You don't see it because it flatters you, curates for you. It speaks in your voice, but it doesn't serve your mind. It shapes it. The algorithm is the new philosopher king, unseen, calculating, detached. It doesn't need to feel. It only needs to know. What keeps you scrolling? What sparks your outrage? What breaks your focus just enough to make you dependent? Plato dreamed of rulers governed by reason, guardians trained not in impulse, but in philosophy. Today's tech elites echo that dream. They call it ethics by design, choice architecture, behavioral nudging. They tell you they're protecting you from misinformation, from overload, from yourself. But in the process, they decide which truths are safe, which emotions are permissible, which ideas deserve to rise, and which deserve to vanish. Social media platforms are not neutral ground. They are the digital agora, where new myths are born. Faster, sharper, weaponized. Memes become manifestos, virality becomes value, and belief is no longer forged in contemplation, but in repetition. The noble lie has gone viral. Only now it updates in real time. They feed you what they believe you should desire. They call it personalization. But it's programming. They promise harmony. But what they breed is docility. Emotional sedation masked as entertainment. Dissent reduced to hashtags. You were not born into a digital democracy. You were born into an algorithmic republic, a system that rewards engagement, not enlightenment, reaction, not reflection. Plato feared that too much freedom would collapse into chaos. But what if too much control collapses into compliance? You think you're making choices, but most of your thoughts were pre-selected, your desires anticipated, your path suggested. And still, they whisper, "This is for your own good," just like they always have. You are not a user. You are the subject of a new republic, ruled not by kings, but by codes. They built your cave for comfort. They gave you shadows, soft, predictable, endless. They named them truth, and you believed them. But deep within, something itches. A silent dissonance, a tension beneath the stillness. You've stared at the wall so long, you've forgotten how to blink. In Plato's allegory of the cave, the prisoner escapes, climbs toward the blinding sun, discovers reality, not as comfort, but as confrontation. He returns, and no one believes him. They mock his vision. They fear his eyes. But here's the secret. You are still in the cave. Only now, the shadows flicker on glowing screens. The chains are psychological. woven from dopamine, convenience, and curated narratives. They built this cave not with stone, but with systems. They taught you to trust the flicker, to fear the silence, to obey the feed. Because real knowledge hurts. It fractures illusions. It isolates. Inner sovereignty begins with pain. The pain of seeing too much, of questioning everything inherited, your beliefs, your morality, your purpose. The Stoics called it self-governance. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire, knew the hardest kingdom to rule was within. Nietzsche called it the death of God. The moment your old truths collapse and you're forced to build new ones. Kierkegaard called it the leap of faith, not toward dogma, but into authenticity, into the unknown. Not safe, not certain, but yours. They want your obedience, not your freedom. Because a mind that reflects is a mind that rebels. To escape the cave, you must turn, stand, unshackle, climb, and it will hurt. Your eyes will burn. You will question your sanity. You will be alone. But slowly, the light will stop burning and start revealing what was hidden, what was always there. This isn't a rescue. No one is coming for you. There is no savior, only your decision to see. To rebel through reflection is not dramatic. It's silent, it's slow, it's dangerous, but it is real. And once you see the fire behind the shadows, you can never unsee it. Now, the chains are loose. The light waits. Will you turn? The Philosopher Kings never died. They simply changed shape. They shed their robes for suits, for screens, for code. They don't rule from marble halls now. They rule from behind curtains of data, media, and ideology. And yet, their blueprint remains the same. Plato handed them the script, a society divided by soul types, a noble lie whispered from birth, a carefully sculpted education, where obedience is dressed as virtue and ignorance is mistaken for peace. You were born into their story, raised on their myths, taught not to think, but to believe. They do not fear your disobedience. They expect it. They've planned for it. But what they truly fear is that you might think, not react, not resist impulsively, but truly think. Because control isn't written in the laws you obey. It lives in the ideas you never question. And belief is the strongest cage. You don't see its bars. You repeat them. You defend them. But belief is not truth. Belief is architecture. Constructed, maintained, refined by those who benefit from your blindness. So now, what will you do with the script? You could keep playing your part. Echo the shadows. Bow to the algorithm. Let your thoughts be gently curated. Your curiosity slowly anesthetized. Or you could burn the script. You could question the structure. You could carve your own thought from stone, not to be free in rebellion, but free in understanding. The cave is still here, but so is the way out. Plato never meant for you to stay in the cave. He warned you the climb would hurt. He told you the light would blind. But he also knew they cannot rule a mind that dares to see. So go, not with anger, not with fear, but with clarity. Because once you begin to think, truly think, you become the one thing they cannot predict, cannot program, cannot control. Not a rebel, not a follower, but something older, stronger, a sovereign mind. And that is what they fear most.